I sat down with Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin to talk to him about where the Hunter and Joe Biden investigations go. Where are they now? What do we know? What else do we need to know? How are his colleagues on the Republican side taking this investigation? And here's the bigger question. What happens if we get back in the majority? Where will this go? What does he need to find out what's happening? And is there really a link to Joe Biden? What do we know? What don't we know? What more is to come? But Ron Johnson also got into politics from business. He was a business leader. I want to know from him what his experience is like in the U.S. Senate, number one. Number two, why aren't certain things happening? Why are we not getting rid of certain spending things? Why is change not happening as quick as possible? Senator Johnson, I want to, first of all, thanks for being here. Thanks for welcoming us to Milwaukee. I want to start in a little backwards way because I know there's a lot going on in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin, but I don't think that we would know what we know about Hunter Biden and his business dealings. It wasn't if you weren't dogged in your pursuit of these documents. And I don't think that's an understatement by any means, because it seems like since the laptop discovery, there's been one roadblock after another of don't look here, this is disinformation. 51 intelligence agencies telling us it's Russian disinformation. How much more is there, I guess, to what Hunter Biden has been doing that we don't know yet?
Well, first of all, the roadblock started way before the roadblock on the laptop. The FBI took possession of Hunter Biden's laptop in, December 2019? That's right when Senator Grassley and I were ramping up our investigation. Throughout our investigation, our ranking members, Democrat senators, were accusing us of soliciting and disseminating Russian disinformation.
Yeah.
The press picked up on that. And so that was the entire theme. Then, in August of 2020, both Senator Grassley and I get an unsolicited briefing by the FBI where they're basically telling us, you're targeting Russian disinformation. And it's like, okay, we've been accused of this for months now. Do you have more information? Nothing we can share. So at that point in my briefing, there were separate briefings, I started asking, who directed you to brief us? Who did that? Sean, 3 years later, I've asked Christopher Wray in open hearing, who directed that briefing? They won't tell us. They'll say, it's interagency process. Well, there are people in the interagency. So basically, I view that as an operation directed by the FBI, intelligence agencies, against Senator Grassley and I to marginalize our report, which we dropped before the Hunter Biden laptop. Actually, we were offered that laptop the day after our report dropped because Mr. McIsaac finally decided that he would be safe enough to go public with it if the U.S. senators were looking into this thing. So there's a story that has not been told about this, the corruption of federal law enforcement. But again, Senator Grassley and I pretty well laid out the foundational evidence. I mean, more than enough evidence to, I think, convince people, certainly me, Joe Biden never should have been president. Now we're filling in the details. So we're getting more pieces of the puzzle. But it's been obvious to me, and I think it's been obvious to anybody paying attention, that Joe Biden has been corrupt. He's been lying to the American public since he plagiarized the British, politician back in his first presidential run.
I want to back into this for a second because I want to get to the Biden piece. But I think what's so funny is as you're telling this story, I'm flashing back to right after Trump wins. We have this briefing about what was supposed to be an intel briefing. All these guys in the room. I had a security briefing, a security clearance at the time, so I was one of the few people who actually got to sit in it. I watched Comey at the end pull Trump aside and said, I got to tell you something. They didn't have the Steele dossier at the time, blah, 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 blah. And then getting told by reporters and I was like, I was not only in the meeting, I was part of it. It was amazing, the misinformation. But the reason I'm bringing this up is it was the FBI briefing the president-elect about an uncorroborated bunch of allegations. The first thing I did, I'm not law enforcement, I'm not an investigator. I remember when BuzzFeed calls and says, hey, and CNN, here's this dossier. And I said, well, one of the allegations was Michael Cohen had been to Prague during this time. I called Cohen, I said, do you have your passport? He said he did. We looked through it, Cohen had never exited the country nor re-entered in a time frame close to that. I thought to myself, okay, here right off the bat is something that I can find that doesn't jive. Wouldn't that have caused a bunch of FBI agents to say, but this is what blows my mind is I keep thinking, I'm not law enforcement, I'm not a trained investigator, you're a businessman. And you and I are sitting here going, how did the FBI miss this? How did they do this?
Because, Sean, they were corrupt. Understand. John Brennan, who through intel sources found out that Hillary Clinton was going to hatch a scheme to accuse the Trump campaign, including with Russia, he briefed Vice President Biden and Barack Obama, I think it was in August of 2016. Let's face it, intelligence, that group of people took out Michael Flynn. He would be way too dangerous as Director of National Intelligence. So they took him out. That was an FBI sting operation basically on Michael Flynn. They knew all this. They knew the Steele dossier's source was somebody they were investigating as a Russian spy. They knew all of this, and yet they proceeded with the false narrative that they knew that Hillary Clinton came up with. By the way, it all dates back to the hacking of the DNC server. I have not seen solid evidence that was actually hacked by Russia. The emails themselves are incredibly damaging to certain members of the Democrat Party. So I think they had to come up with a diversionary tactic. Hey, let's say this was hacked by Russia. Let's direct and they've been doing that now for year after year after year against Senator Grassley and myself, against President Trump. That's been their canard. Let's say Russia has interfered in these things and will distract the American public from our wrongdoing. That's
what blows my mind is that when I have these discussions with people and they go, oh, Russia and the Steele dossier, and I'll give them the example I just gave to you. Do you guys realize that, like me, not the intelligence, I said, gosh, here's why this doesn't make sense. And everyone said, you know what the funny thing is? The reply I got was, I said, hey, look, here's Michael Cohen's passport. He's willing to show you that this doesn't happen. Therefore, this calls into credibility. They go, yeah, but what about the next thing? Now, normally somebody comes to you and says, hey, I just figured out this problem and here are the 4 things. And you go, but 1 and 2 don't make sense or that doesn't work. They don't turn around and go, well, let's try 3 and 4. You go, clearly you didn't do your homework. You don't know what's going on. And yet the media and the government, despite these continued instances of this, just press forward as if, okay, forget that. Let's move on. It is, yeah, sure, and your point about the American people.
We're up against powerful forces. Shifting a little bit different subject, COVID. I call it the COVID cartel.
And you were out there on that.
The Biden administration, the federal health agencies who've been captured by Big Pharma. Big Pharma has also captured the media. That's why they spend billions of dollars on ads saying that this drug may kill you. And it makes no sense other than for them to control the narrative, and plus the big tech social media giants. So that is the COVID cartel. They have been spectacularly wrong on the response to COVID. It is a miserable failure, but the body count is way too high that they can't afford to be proven wrong, and they have the power to make sure you can't prove them wrong. And the same thing is true of the whole Russian collusion hoax. They were spectacularly wrong. They've been proven wrong. They'll just never admit it, and they have the power to pretty well sweep it under the rug. That's what they're doing.
Before I forget this, I do want to go back to Hunter, because what you're talking about gets to something I want to get to in a second in terms of how you transition to government, what you think. But I want to get back to the Hunter Biden thing for one thing, because I've said this over and over again. We're a big country. There's a lot of dirtballs, unfortunately. Hunter Biden is one of those. Being a dirtball isn't illegal. But the connection, and what I've said about Republicans' efforts is it goes back to what you were saying. Connecting this to Joe Biden. If he as the president did things, we know that he's misled us already. I knew nothing of my son's business dealings. If this was Donald Trump, people would be going nuts and saying, you lied again, you did know, this is a cover-up. I'm sure that the Russians through the Seychelles are connected to some Syrians. They'd be making a million connections. Now they've shifted and said, what's the new line is, I wasn't directly involved.
Or there's no proof that I was directly,
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure you click the link below to find out more, or you can go to SeanSpicerShow.com to stay up to date on all my content.